Students, this is session 3 for week 2 in Introduction to Graduate Research, offered by Asian Christian University. I am your instructor, Philip Gray, from Bremen, Georgia, in the United States. I thank you for your attention and want to remind you of the class that I taught last, the video that you have probably recently watched. It was session 2, of course, for the second week, having to do with the problem of accreditation, the need for accreditation. And I explained about accrediting authorities being bodies of intellectual men who gather together, who exist, who are organized for the purpose of validating the programs of various schools, of the schools that want to participate, and be considered to be legitimate schools, to be on par with the excellency of the other schools that have met the standards to be a part of that program. So we're talking then about the need for accreditation. Now, I have not been able to look into all aspects of this, as I have said in previous presentations. I don't know a great deal about your system, but I did do some quick checking, and some of these things are available online, an article about your institutions in the Philippines, and I'll read here a paragraph or so that might be of interest to us, and it will illustrate the main principles I'm trying to get across in this session today. There is an article on the internet concerning K-12 academics education worldwide in the Philippines. There's a paragraph that speaks of accreditation of private institutions, and there is some difference between accreditation of private institutions and accreditation for public institutions. So I would imagine, of course, the former would be applicable to our situation of Asian Christian University. And it says, quote, voluntary accreditation of all higher education institutions is subject to the policies of the Commission on Higher Education. Voluntary accrediting agencies in the private sector are the Philippine Accrediting Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities. And the anagram for that, or acronym, is PAASCU. PAASCU. I would think you would pronounce PAASCU, the Philippine Accrediting Association of Schools, Colleges, and Universities. Also, they list the Philippine Association of Colleges and Universities Commission on Accreditation, or PACUCOA, PACUCOA, I would think it would be, and the Association of Christian Schools, Colleges, and Universities Accrediting Association, Inc., or ACSCU-AAI. Again, ACSCU-AAI. And then it continues, which all operate under the umbrella of the Federation of Accrediting Agencies of the Philippines, the FAAP, Federation of Accrediting Agencies of the Philippines, FAAP, which itself is the certifying agency authorized by CHED, CHED. Accreditation can be either of programs or of institutions. So I found that to be interesting, and I'm not really sure how that may correspond to our system here in the United States. I'm familiar with the concept of accrediting entire institutions, but that of accrediting particular programs within institutions is a novel idea to me personally. It may be well known to all of you. And he mentioned that there are several universities in your country and private colleges that do enjoy the accreditation of many of their programs, but not necessarily of the entire institution. But he does mention this. 2 institutions, Ateneo de Manila University and De La Salle University / Manila, were granted Level 4 accreditation pursuant to the provisions of CHED Order CMO 31 of 1995. But their Level 4 institutional accreditation lapsed. So I pause to say, this is one of the issues that we face in the world of academia. When we seek to be recognized by our peers, and especially outside of our own brotherhood, those who are our peers or who are our colleagues in a similar kind of profession, that of ministry, for example, or that of teaching in the universities, we run the risk of not meeting their standards, and once we acquire accreditation, once we receive that accreditation, if we don't maintain the standards as per their evaluation, the evaluation of those accrediting authorities or accrediting bodies, we might easily lose that accreditation. Well, you may think to yourself, that's a good thing, is it not, Brother Gray? Because if it doesn't deserve to be considered accredited any longer, if the program has lapsed into inefficiency, for example, if the quality of instruction is not as good as it used to be, if the teachers are not competent, for example, then maybe it ought not to be accredited. But that could be argued. That's a good point. But at the same time, the evaluation of what is a worthy program or what is a worthy institution often lies in the minds of those who are not a part of our fellowship. I'm thinking of us in the churches of Christ and our desire to provide quality formal education. So as we are seeking to establish and maintain our Christian colleges and schools, our universities, then we must be very careful that we meet the standards that are expected of any university at the same level that would be offering the same kind of degrees. But we have to be very cautious, as we will see in a moment, in compromising our core beliefs in order to satisfy the requirements of some people who are outside of our fellowship, who may not think as we think, and who may view the world very differently. Well, I continue the reading of this article that I was able to find posted online. I'm not sure of the total accuracy of this. You have to always be careful with anything you research on the internet. But at present, it says, and I'm not sure what year this was written. Let me see if I can locate that. Well, actually, let me see if the year of posting. No, the year of its posting is not actually mentioned. Maybe some of you can locate this later on. But it says, at present, 9 universities, and this is in your country, the Philippines, have current institutional accreditation. Institutional accreditation. And that's what I've been speaking about from the beginning of these two subjects, of our 2 sessions, rather, on the subject of accreditation. He goes on to say, institutional accreditation is the highest certification that can be given to an educational institution after a consideration of the university's number of individual program accreditations and the result of an overall evaluation of the quality of its facilities, services, and faculty. Again, here the emphasis would be on the fact that an evaluation of our school must take place, or of any school that you may serve, where you may serve as a faculty member or an administrator. There has to be an evaluation of the quality of the facilities, the services, and the faculty. These schools that he mentions which have this status now in your country are Adventist University of the Philippines, Ateneo de Manila University, Ateneo de Davao University, Ateneo de Naga University, Centro Escolar University, Central Philippine University, De La Salle University, or De La Salle University, I'm not sure your pronunciation, Desmariñas, Silliman University, Trinity University of Asia, and University of Santo Tomas. Well, those are listed at the time of this writing as already enjoying institutional status. Well, let me go back and say, here's what we hope to accomplish. We want to be, one day, the Lord willing, able to say that our program is fully accredited. We hope to do that. Our institution is fully accredited. In order to do that, I would assume we would begin by making sure that each of our programs in the institution are fully accredited. And that might be a good thing in many ways. I extolled the virtues of possessing academic accreditation in the previous presentation. If we have developed good programs which we think are adequate and that really do compare well with similar kinds of programs offered by schools that are recognized as accredited schools, then we want our program of study to be recognized by others. If a school does not enjoy accreditation, it might be a little bit more difficult, and in some cases even impossible, for you to transfer your credits, your hours of study in one institution, the unaccredited institution, to another institution which is accredited. Some of those other accredited institutions are leery about accepting work done in non-accredited institutions. So we would want a transfer of our credits. We would want validation and recognition. We would want recognition. Or you could say status in some senses of the word. We don't want to have any gaps in our program. We want to make sure that there's not a part of our program of study that is in some way unequal to other programs that are accredited. So that's what we have in mind when we talk about accreditation. And that really belongs to our former study, the former session, session 2 for this week. Now we're in session 3, where I'm talking about some of the problems with accreditation. One of the things I was perusing as I was preparing this is a book presented back in the 1990s called No Place for Truth. Let me see if I can get this stabilized. Or Whatever Happened to Evangelical Theology. And the author is Dr. David F. Wells. And this is a good study of the problems with the modern world and how those problems have affected ministerial training, for example. He has a chapter called The New Disablers in which he talks about such things as the development of the D-Min program and the need for increasing professionalism within ministry, the need for increasing specialization. And Dr. Wells points out the obvious that in my country in the early 1800s, the ministry was considered to be a very prestigious profession. And a man who was competent and willing to go into the ministry often was highly esteemed by his peers in his community. He was often the focal point of a community, believe it or not. He was centrally located, intellectually speaking, in the community, and his opinions, his views about things mattered greatly for members of the community. That all began to change in the middle to the latter part of the 19th century, that is the 1800s, especially with the increase of secularization and the rise of evolutionary theories and the demise of status of religion in general in the eyes of many members of the public. So as secularism increased, disdain for the ministry increased, and there was a loss of prestige. What to do about it? Well, many programs of study decided in their seminaries they would increase the standards and make sure ministers were more highly competent than their peers, their counterparts in the professions, such as in law or architecture or engineering or in medicine, which are considered to be standard kinds of professions in this country, perhaps in yours also. They wanted to have standards that were just as high. Areas of specialization. And the emphasis was more pragmatic than it was doctrinal. It was on the pragmatic competence the minister would have in dealing with problems in the church, being an administrator in the church. Now, you and I know biblically that's not really the preacher's role. Biblically, that role is left to the elders, a plurality of qualified men who are to serve as elders, pastors, or bishops within the church. But this has been the tendency in denominationalism ever since the turn of the 20th century. The D-Min program came about largely in the 1970s as a result of the desire to produce a professional type of degree in contrast to a more theological or academic degree such as the Doctor of Philosophy degree or even the Doctor of Theology degree. I will probably talk about that more in depth in later studies. But getting back to the question of accreditation, I found this note to be interesting where this author is talking about the ATS in the United States, the Association of Theological Schools. I believe that it is. The Association of Theological Schools. Let me be sure of that before I continue. It is the Association of Theological Schools, the ATS, which was formed in this country back in the 1940s with the express purpose of validating the work of seminaries and universities that train preachers. And it exists to this day, and it is considered to be the most desirable accreditation other than the one that's standard for a university, such as Amherst University. Amherst University enjoys accreditation with the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools, SACS, which is the acronym for that institution, and has had in the past, I'm not sure of the status at the moment, but has had some sort of special provisional status with the ATS, the American Theological, or Association of Theological Schools, rather. I do remember that, and this is one of the things I want to warn about, this is the main point of this lecture, that in order to be able to receive accreditation or to become a provisional member, a member perhaps on a probationary basis, that our school, that Amherst University, had to submit the program of study to the educated men who make up the ATS. And those are not necessarily members of the Church of Christ. In fact, few would be. Nor are they necessarily sympathetic to our particular beliefs. Many of them hold to more theologically liberal points of view. So their approach to things would be different. When they would view our program and how we worded things, for example, in our academic catalogs, printed publications designed to show the courses of study and what goals were in mind for those studies, they sometimes looked askance at the way we said things. Everybody, it seems, is influenced or affected by the zeitgeist of our age. That is, the ghost of the age, the spirit of the age, the prevailing beliefs of the age. And this is the idea of the German word zeitgeist of the age. You've probably encountered that in your reading. And the zeitgeist of our time is very modernistic, very left-wing in many respects. So that, for instance, I know we were receiving criticism because we would not use what is called gender-inclusive language, referring to his and her and all of the things. That's a very clumsy way of saying it, referring to his or her needs. When talking about the students, for example, we often do that. It's just a habit we've picked up from our contemporaries. But in the past, the word his, the masculine form, which is technically grammatically masculine, was used generally to refer either to the masculine or to the feminine variety, whatever we had in mind, a male or a female. So in English grammar, traditionally, he or him, the objective form, have been used to refer to either sex. But the problem is that the liberals of our time have co-opted much of education, and they didn't like the fact we did that. I was thankful that our brother Lawrence Barkley, who was a professor for many years in good standing at Amherst Christian University, was able to write a very thoughtful response to their critiques and to let the members of the ATS who were coming down to evaluate our program know that we were not willing to compromise in that area. We will not train and ordain. We don't ordain anyway, technically speaking. We will not train women for the ministry. Now, there are some women who are not members of the church who join those programs, often on an Air Force scholarship or some other military scholarship, and they might go off into their denomination and preach on the basis of the degree they receive. But our emphasis is not in teaching them to do that or in encouraging them to do that. And we're not going to necessarily give in to the spirit of our age. And I think Brother Barkley did a really good job of staying off the wolves, of showing it could be done and how it was to be done and how we would go about doing it. Being fair to those women who did matriculate into the program, but at the same time not compromising our views about what the Bible says respecting the role of women in the church. Now, that's just one area. Let me emphasize the area of gender-inclusive language. Whenever we seek to get our program validated by our peers outside of the churches of Christ, whenever we hope that they will respect what we're doing and view it as being equal to, on par with, the work that's being done by denominational schools who are offering similar kinds of degrees, who have similar kinds of programs and similar kinds of trained faculty members, whenever we do that, we're always running the risk of being forced to compromise some core beliefs, some biblical doctrines, in order to get them to allow us to receive their much coveted accreditation. We need to recruit students from outside of our fellowship, for example. So we may water down our doctrinal hard edges in our presentation in some of our classes. I have, frankly, been in classes where that evidently was the motive of the professor. Not to say anything too controversial, lest students who are not members of the church who are in that class get upset and decide to leave and to take with them their money for their tuition. We need to meet accrediting standards. This might require meeting some of the modern views about gender-inclusive language. But we must be very cautious and hold our ground firmly when it comes to the questions of what we consider to be right and wrong. We end up hiring teachers with degrees who often will come from sectarian schools. Well, we need to have teachers with degrees from many different institutions. There is such a thing that's called academic inbreeding. Academic inbreeding. And it's the idea that academic incest is being committed. That's a figure of speech, of course. I'm using this figuratively. And if all of the teachers have their degree from the same institution, and the students are being taught by teachers who all learned at the same place, the idea is that they would simply rehash the same learning and not get anything new, not be exposed to any new ideas. So the emphasis is on having teachers who have studied at different institutions around the world. Sometimes false teachers will come in and will take over the work. If they see it as now fully accredited or on its way to being accredited, they will see it as having more value, even monetary value. Yes, sometimes even academia is commercialized, believe it or not. And some view schools as just a way to make money, to feather their own nest, to line their own pockets. And false teachers may see this opportunity and come in and take over the work. This has been a trend many times seen in the past. There have been many attempts to take over our schools in different ways. And whenever we're preoccupied with meeting the standards of the age, meeting the standards of the accreditation bodies that may regulate our work, we're robbing precious time for quality instruction of students. I don't know how many times in my own studies I've heard my professors bemoan the fact they would like to be able to write more and to take the findings of their research and preparation for the courses they offered and putting them in print, scholarly journals, books, producing videos, and things of that nature, but do not have the time, they would say, because we're always having to sit down and write out lists and the criteria that we've satisfied for the Association of Colleges and Schools or for the ATS or any other accrediting authority whose approval we are seeking. We're always busy jumping through the hoops and not really providing the kind of quality education that is biblically based that we need. I'm probably going to continue some of these themes that I've introduced in this session. The theme of the tendency to compromise in academia and the problems of arrogance, the problems of haughtiness, of arrogancy and haughtiness and pride that will develop in the world of higher education. But I hope that I have begun to point your minds in that direction. Some of you might be more familiar with the details of accreditation than others, but all of us should have some view of what it means. Now, coming back to this program, let me summarize and say, it is our desire, the Lord willing, to be able to build this program up in such a way that in some period of time, a very reasonable period of time, we might be able to submit a request to the appropriate accrediting authority in the Philippines, who will review the work that's being done and see the programs that are being offered and see the nature of the institution and the qualifications of the faculty and the administration, and who might decide to confer upon us either program accreditation of various programs or hopefully even the total accreditation of the school itself, accreditation of the institution. That is what we hope to see, the Lord willing. But in order to achieve that goal, while we're willing to work hard and offer the same number of hours to receive the same degree, require the same number of pages read generally that the average student would be required to read in a comparable program of study in another school that is accredited, while we seek to follow all those standards, we do not want to compromise our faith or our unique beliefs that we believe are biblical. We want to be true to the Word of God first and receive accreditation secondly, because we want to make sure that our degrees have value in the world at large, that if we can present ourselves to others who may not yet know us as having a, for example, master's degree or master of divinity degree or a doctor of ministry degree from Asian Christian University, that would immediately ring a bell in their mind and they would think to themselves, I remember hearing about that school, that is fully accredited, so you have a degree that is equal, that is comparable to degrees that are offered even in the denominational schools. It is not our desire to compete with the denominations in that way and to show ourselves as fully competent according to the expectations they have as denominationalists. But it is our desire not to have a substandard program that others would be ashamed of or that others would laugh at once they view what we require. If we don't require adequate work and we're willing to give a degree out and we turn into just a degree mill, then shame on us. God would pity us and all would pity us. But I hope that does not happen. Well, be prepared for next week's session. I'll try to get that available and ready just as soon as possible. I know we're behind now. We're a couple of weeks behind, but I'm going to try to play catch up and get these pretty well on schedule again as soon as possible. Thank you very much, students, and be sure, please, to let me know you have watched these sessions this week.